Well, as we come to chapter 31, the day of Saul is now ended. And as we'll get next week into the 2 Samuel, the day of David has begun. And we see here, it says, now the Philistines fought against Israel. Remember back in chapter 28 when Saul saw the armies of the Philistines, that his heart just melted within him. Of course, it seemed to happen each time. The guy was a coward. He was willing to give David his armor to go fight against Goliath years back earlier. He seemed to not have faith to go to any battle not confidence. At least there was one time that he did, the Spirit of God came upon him with Jabesh Gilead, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But outside of that, he was a scared guy. Huge guy, monstrous guy, the king, had giant armies, but he wasn't walking in faith. And if you don't walk in faith, you don't have bravery. What's that which overcomes the world? Our faith. And that faith gives you the strength to believe that greater is he that is in you, or the one who's fighting for you, than he who is in the world. But they fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And I think tonight we have a picture of Mount Gilboa. Do we have a picture? There it is. And that mountain today, there's nothing there. And it's right on the edge of the most fruitful valley in the entire world, the Jezreel Valley. But that particular mountain grows absolutely nothing. And I honestly believe it's because David cursed it. We're going to read here in a minute. But the Philistines followed hard after Saul and his sons. So they figured out where the royal family was, and they began to just attack that, cut off the head of the snake, and the snake dies, so to speak. And the Philistines killed Jonathan. You might have not have known the other two sons of Saul, but Abinadab and Malchishua. So, for $1 million, who are the three sons of Saul? Jonathan. Who was the other guy? Abinadab. You're 3/4 of a way there to $1 million. Fred. Malchishua. You're kidding. I've never heard that name. Well, it's because you didn't go to church Sunday nights. It's costing you in many ways. Okay. You say it's sort of sad there that Saul's sons had to die along with their foolish dad. We don't know where Abinadab or Malchishua was, if they were wicked men like their dad, or whether they were righteous men of any kind. We don't have a reference on that. And remember, in this culture, it was expected that the next son would become king. And no doubt, Jonathan would have been put in a place to fight against his two brothers. Because if he was in line to be king, he was going to tell them, no. God has told me that David is to be king, and I'm going to support him in any way I can for him to be king. And they would have said, well, if you're not going to be king, then step away, we're going to be king, or whatever. It would have came down to a family bloodshed and been a very, very ripping and tearing, difficult time for Jonathan, wanting to joyfully, with freedom in his heart to support David as king, but how? Practically, when it came down to it, how? With all the cousins and uncles and everybody of Saul, there just never would have been a way for such a thing to practically happen. And so, again, God's ways are higher than our ways, as high as the heavens are above the earth, it says in Isaiah. And maybe the most loving thing for Jonathan at this point was just not to put him in the midst of that family mess that would have been there at Saul's death. and to just take him on home. So don't feel bad for Jonathan. He got to go right to be in the bosom of Abraham and fellowship and a place of comfort and joy until Jesus showed up and preached the gospel for 3 days and 3 nights, and they left the paradise side of the Sheol, and as we talked about a few weeks ago, and then went to be with the Lord. And so today in the New Testament, be absent from the bodies, to be present with the Lord, but yet the holding place of the wicked and Hades we talked about is still there to this day. And so again, it's sad though. It's just sad to see a dad and all 3 boys killed together in the same spot, in the same battle. And it's God's people. These are God's chosen people. This is God's army. But yet, because of Saul and because of his wickedness, remember, God wouldn't speak to him. And he tried to have dreams and prophecies, and finally he went to a witch to say, call up the spirit of Samuel and have him talk to me. And of course, the scriptures are loaded that God's going to curse the man. You're to put to death the man who goes and tries to inquire through a witch and to listen to some demonic spirit lie to you. So, and it's twisted mind, though, somehow as he goes to the witch and, gets through the back door into God's spiritual world. Hey, I know I wasn't supposed to take this door, employees only, but hey, let me just talk to you and let me convince you that it's okay for me to do it because I was in a really bad situation. And of course, it was ridiculous. And so Homer said, as goes the king, so goes the people. And so it seems to be true that Saul was a failure before God with his sinful life, and he led his people into failure. And the battle, it says in verse 3, became fierce against Saul. Archers hit him, or literally they found him. It almost gives this sense of, the arrows could have gone one way, but it's almost like God directed the arrows to hit him. We know that in some of those battles that the guys come out unscathed and all the enemy dies. And it's sort of an amazing thing that all those guys lived, and it was just sort of a supernatural protection of God working on behalf of them. And in this case, it was the opposite. It's almost if the guy says, wow, I didn't think I could even reach him. And all of a sudden the arrow goes an extra 100 yards to reach Saul, to hit him. And he was severely wounded by the archers. And Saul said to his armor bearer, draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and thrust me and abuse me or torture me, which would have definitely been the case. So go ahead and mercy, kill me, finish me off. I don't want these guys to get me and get me alive. What are they going to do while I'm alive? How are they going to torture me? Maybe keep me alive and take all my fingernails off and skin me alive, or, who knows? Any evil, sadistic, wicked thing was very, very possible. So don't let them catch me alive. Be my right-hand man, and the best thing you can do for me now is not protect me, but kill me so I don't get tortured. But his armor bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. This is the king. It's just so in his mind to protect the king, to jump in front of the king before he gets shot, or, lay your own life down, but to kill him. His mind had been so clearly situated to protect him. It was not something he could see himself doing. And Saul took a sword and fell on it. So it didn't even sound like it's Saul's sword. He just took a sword and just somehow stood up and then just fell in such a way that the sword went through him. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him. You sort of got to ask yourself at this moment, how did David think? What reaction did David have at hearing this news of Saul's death? Remember back, matter of fact, turn just a couple of pages back to chapter 26, verse 9 and 10. Remember, this is when Abishai and David had snuck down into Saul's camp, and God had put them all into a supernatural sleep. And Abishai just says, let me take Saul's spear. I'll thrust him through. He'll never even wake up. He'll feel no pain. And finally, David said to Abishai in verse 9, do not destroy him. For who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? Boys, you read Romans 13, you get that same sense. God's raised up and only God can bring down. And that whatever the authority is, God's allowed it to be in power. And you say, but Saul wasn't a Democrat. Yes, I know he wasn't a Democrat. He was an independent. But either way, he was a wicked man, at least towards David. And you think David would have said, you don't touch the Lord's anointed unless he's crazy. Demons come on him, and he gets crazier. Unless he's thrown 2 times spears at you to try to kill you, unless he's had thousands of his mightiest soldiers try to chase you down for year after year after year and kill you. I mean, boy, David had some pretty good excuses to make Saul an exception to this rule, didn't he? All the other guys got it. Everybody in the whole country got it except David. And David said, there's no exception clause. And David, furthermore, in verse 10 said, look, I've thought about this. As the Lord lives, these are the options. I can't think of any more. The Lord shall strike him. We just had a story, remember, about Nabal, who is a horrible, foolish guy who didn't deserve the beautiful wife he had and said rude things to us. And the Lord killed him. And then his beautiful wife was up to grabs, and I married her. So that's one way. The Lord could just strike him down with some crazy, disease, Ebola, or some other flesh-eating disease or something. Or his day shall come to die. You die. I mean, sometimes people die at 10 and 30 and 40 and 140. I mean, his day comes where, for whatever reason, he dies. And I'll tell you, I've seen people, even at very young age, die, and nobody knows why to this day. It's just no idea. Or, here it is, he shall go out to battle and perish. He's going to go out in battle, and people die in battle. And, of course, the Lord's hand of protection would be drawn from him, and he would die. And David here is now saying, wow, it was just a short time back. Me and Abishai were having a discussion. And here it is. He would die in battle. That was one of the options. And here I hear now that he died in battle. Well, you know what? David went down. Remember, he fought against the Amalekites, and he came back with all his family and all his stuff. And he comes back, interesting, to the burnt down town of Ziklag. Everything's burnt, but they're all back in Ziklag sitting around, and the kids are playing in the ashes, and, they're sitting around a familiar sight. I don't know, they're just waiting for the Lord's direction for the next step. And of course, Ziklag is outside the promised land. Ziklag is where David and his men were just like a bunch of crazy land pirates going out and just killing people and taking their spoils and killing man, woman, and child. And it was just a evil, backslidden, wicked time in David's life. And he's sitting there and waiting for the Lord. And he's sitting there and he gets this news about Saul. So what do you think his first reaction was? Hip, hip, hooray, the king is dead, give me a high five, woohoo, pull out the wine, let's party, guys. Wicked King Saul is dead. Was that his reaction? We actually know what it was. Look in chapter 1 of 2 Samuel, verse 17, guys. 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 17. Just look a page over to the right in my Bible. And David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son. And he told them to teach them to the children of Judah the song of the bow. So we are all children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We are all Jews adopted in, it tells us in Romans 9, 10, and 11, by faith in the faith of Abraham. So we are also to teach this to our children. What are we teaching here? What we're really teaching is David's heart towards Saul. And we're going to get this. This is important. And indeed, it is written in the book of Jasher. That's a poetic book or a song book that was also in existence. That's no longer in existence, but the Word of God that can never pass away is still here. And in verse 19, the beauty of Israel is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath. Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. Verse 20 is sort of interesting, isn't it? Because these are the places today where the Palestinians live, who say they're the ancient people of the Philistines. And what happened on 9/11 when the trade centers blew up? Did you see what happened in those places? They were in the cities rejoicing and dancing and shooting guns, and all the ladies are going, and all that just puts a chill up my spine. But don't tell it in those places, because I know what they're going to do. They're going to go celebrate as if some wonderful thing happened, and when it's really a horrible, horrific thing that's happened. In verse 21, O mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew nor rain upon you, nor fields of offerings, nor the shield of the mighty. For the shield of the mighty is cast away there, and the shield of Saul is not anointed with oil. So right there, interesting to the very day, everything around Gilboa is very, very fertile, but not Gilboa. Next trip to Israel, we'll stop by there and let you take a look. From the blood, and from the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, and the sword of Saul did not return empty. Boy, Saul was a mighty soldier. Saul was a mighty military guy. When Saul went out to battle, he was a hero. And so is Jonathan. Saul and Jonathan were beloved and pleasant in their lives. And in their death, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, and they were stronger than lions. These guys were pleasant. Well, but didn't Saul throw some spears at you? Forget it. Don't talk about that. I'm talking about the other times. He was my father-in-law. He took me into his house graciously. And didn't he try to have you killed other times? And David's choosing here to remember the pleasant things of Saul, isn't he? There really were only pleasant things about Jonathan, but he's choosing to remember the pleasant things of Saul. What's something else he can say about them? Well, they died in the same spot. Okay. What else? In their youth, they could sure run fast. Okay. They could run fast. They were good militarily. There was some very times that things were pleasant. In verse 24, O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet with luxury, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. Economically, things were good under Saul. And you guys were able to buy the most expensive fabrics to make your clothes, and weep over the loss of your king. And in verse 25, how the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle. Jonathan was slain in your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very pleasant to me. Your love to me was wonderful, surpassing the love of women. I have to point out these days that people try to use this verse to say that David was a homosexual. and it's disgusting and gross and wicked. But he in essence is saying that the love that I have for you goes deep, or as deep or deeper still of even that of with my wife. And do understand that the concept, the New Testament concept of a husband and wife being one and partners and the value of women, all of this wasn't in his culture. And so again, to have a deep friendship with a guy who's your equal would make more sense, but a woman's not your equal. She's, a notch above the cow because they both can make milk. That was sort of the concept. It was a very demeaning. And of course, with David, he had several wives, which even diminishes the quality of what a marriage could have been. So again, his friendship with Jonathan was deeper than any of his wives, and it's not surprising that was the case. But yet he did have a best friend. And I've discovered that most people make it through life without best friends. And I think there's a very specific reason why that is. And one is just sort of to stop to do a teaching on friendship. But there's just a couple of things about friendship that I think are the keys. And that is, one is you pursue that friendship. You meet people and you can know people sort of well for a day or two, but there's like something put into your heart. Like, I love that passage in 2 Timothy where it says, seek those people out who love the Lord with a pure heart. And in other words, just stalk them, be in their lives and take them out to eat and invite them to do things and invite them over to your house, be with them. And you'll find that often they'll be cold and you'll be hot, and they'll be hot and they'll be cold. And I've seen that with a couple of my best friends that, we're best friends today because I pursued them at times. And then there's been other times they've pursued me. But we're friends 30, 40 years later by making the friendship a point. Just like marriage, people think you get married, that's it. You have a wedding day and you'll have a great marriage because you're married. And if you're married, if you have a good marriage, it's because you've worked hard at it continuously. It's not an easy thing. And you keep working and working and working and working, and you have good days and good years and bad decades, and you keep fighting for that friendship and that relationship, and it's worth it. All of a sudden, you've been married 30 years, and you look back going, man, we went through some times that we shouldn't have made it, but we did. And I'm so glad we made it, because you can't start being married 30 years. It takes 30 years to be married 30 years. In the same way, you can't have a friendship that's a 20-year-old friendship without having 20 years. So you can't start today. I want to have a 20-year-old relationship with you, starting today. Hopefully in a year or so, we'll have a 20-year relationship. It takes 20 years. And so those are the things that a lot of people don't realize, is that you got to look at really the ugliest things, the weakest things, the most annoying things, the lack of character people have, and you choose to love them and choose to pray for them, that God would grow them out of those selfish areas or out of those sinful areas or out of those weak areas, and you just hang on to them and keep praying for them and wrestling through. And at times you're screaming at them, rebuking them, and at other times you're listening. You just go through times, and at the end of the day, we're going to keep fighting this out. We're going to keep working with this. And I've just seen it where, love believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. And it's the same way with people. And, just imagine again a church here. We've been going 27 years as a church. Imagine if you've been in this church 27 years. How sweet that would be to have known all of you guys and us together. We've had 27 years of Sunday nights of seeking the Lord. 27 years of going verse by verse to the Bible. it was an interesting thing back in when I was in my early 20s and pastoring, and a thing in the Christianity Times came out and said, how to make a church grow. And interesting, one of the things that was in making a church grow, outside of having almost pink offering bags, which we've never done that, but one of them was just a pastor had been there a long time. There was just a certain point where the pastor had been there so many years that it was just a healing thing to the community. But there was just deep trust issues there that were a blessing. But then there was also just, kids have grown up in that church and, had a couple of junior hires this year, or this last week. They were part of the drama class, and they bumped into my office door really loud, and I thought somebody got hurt, and I opened the door going, "Are you okay?" And she looked into my office, and she said, "I've been here since I was in kindergarten. I've never seen that room, and come on in, guys, take a look at it," whatever. But it was just so cute, This is my house, and there's a door in my house I don't know about, It was just sort of a neat thing. That it takes a lifetime, for those kind of things to happen. And so with Jonathan and David, it was not an easy friendship they had. Everything was sort of going against it because of Saul's hatred towards David. But what do we find here? First of all, I'd just like to say this, that David, number one, I want to write this down, I don't know. Number one, David chose to believe in a sovereign God. He believed to put his trust in a God who knows the future and has the power to hold his life in his future. It's interesting that Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy to remember the prophecies given him and by them to fight the good warfare. In other words, Timothy, you're going to win the battle by believing in the sovereignty of God, that God has spoken to you about things yet to come in your life that haven't happened yet. And you're going to hang on. But some guys haven't, and he names them, and he said they shipwrecked. And one of the reasons Paul says they shipwrecked regarding their faith is they didn't remember the prophecies that were given by God about their future, and they basically said, hey, I've got to take my future in my own hands. I can't trust God to figure out next year. I've got to make my own prosperity in my own way now. Now, had David done that, he would have killed Saul, right? And he had some really great opportunities. But he didn't take them because he kept saying no. Now, God had spoken to Samuel, David, you're going to be king. And his dad was there. His brothers were there. And I'm sure that word got out. But David kept saying, God has prophesied it, that I will be king. And that I need to trust God to get me there in his timing. Now, we remember the first time David could have killed Saul. And he didn't do it. At this time, when David becomes back into Israel, there's going to be a 7.5-year civil war. And you tack that on to the 15 years. It was 22.5 years of very, very hard life before David became king. And he could have cut that whole 22.5 years out had the very first time when Saul walked into the cave to relieve himself, and David was in there with his mighty men and killed him. If he came out with Saul's head, the armies would have cheered David because David had been so wise as a general. Every time David went out, there was just an incredible victory. David, or Saul, the king's whole family, he was married to his daughter who loved him. His sons, again, loved him. Saul's own family would have been for him. All the population of Israel were singing. Saul killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. He killed Goliath and as a young man, and God was with him. And they're just, the whole country, there would have been not even one ripple from David making that choice. It would have been a very smooth transition. But David knew that would not have been trusting in God to make him king. He would have made himself king by his own hand. So number one, he trusted in the sovereignty of God. He trusted in his power, in his timing, which was a long, difficult timing. But I might add that almost the whole book of Psalms is written by David in that 22 and a half years, guys. Are you glad? I mean, how many guys would appreciate the Bible as much without the book of Psalms? Oh, man, I live off the book of Psalms. I don't know how I would have made it without David's crying out to God and David's songs in the Psalms, man. Praise the Lord that God knew what he's doing, didn't he? It was a great cost to David to get us that important part of the Bible. Great. No creature comforts for David during that time, but yet it was so instrumental, so powerful for us to have it. Secondly, David chose to forgive Saul, to let it go. Well, how do you know that? Because the heart speaks the truth. And you can't have been holding on to a hatred against Saul for years or months even, or days even. And then all of a sudden you hear about he's dying and you write this tender song about how he was a great warrior and he was a pleasant man. And, it's like, you just can't do that. You might say, oh, okay, now that he's dead, I forgive him. You can't just sit down and write a song of beauty and say, everybody teach a song about Saul. It couldn't happen, right? Maybe in a few years you could do that. But David said right then, and out of his heart comes this song revealing, out of the abundance of the mouth, the heart speaks, and it reveals he was not holding on to any bitterness against Saul, even though Saul, just a short time before, was seeking to kill him. David had let it go. You know, guys, I can tell you stories that would be embarrassing for me to tell them, but wrongs that people have suffered. And they have every righteous reason to be bitter. And my flesh wants to go, I hate them with you. They are evil. They stole your business. They molested you. They destroyed your marriage. All these things. And it's true, and they did it. And our fleshly body just want to say, listen to my story, blah, 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 blah. Don't they deserve it? And then we got all those movies, where the sort of good guy with the dark side goes out there and takes the bad guys and breaking their arms off and twisting their head around and knocking them off of 10-story buildings, and we're there going, yeah. Take out their gun and blows them into 1,000 pieces. And there's this sadistic part of us that just is like, I love hating people. I love getting revenge. It's sinful. And in Ephesians, it says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. In the New American Standard, it says, lest Satan get a foothold in the door of your heart. It's true. Seems like once you open that door to be bitter, you start trying to shut it, the devil's got his foot in there. He just doesn't let it shut. And the other thing about bitterness, it just will keep creeping up. Year after year after year, it just keeps poisoning you. It's not a big dose that kills you at once. It just sort of, and then what happens is that bitterness you have, you'll transfer it. I had a friendship with a guy, and it was a good friendship, and then one day it was just this ugliness coming from me, and I'm like, what is going on? I start to talk to him, and he had just had a very difficult situation with his brother the last weeks before this, but all this ugliness was coming at me. And then he showed me a picture of his brother. I looked almost identical to his brother. So in his mind, as he was talking to me, he was talking to his brother. And he knew it wasn't the case, but what happens is the bitterness will seep out and go towards others. So if that person's the authority in your life, guess what happens to the next authority in your life? You're just like that last authority in my life. Blah, Goes towards the teacher, go towards the professor, go towards the employer, goes towards the pastor goes towards the police officer. Whatever it is, you're bitter at whatever authority's in your life because you got bitter at your dad and you can't let it go. It just never, it's one of those gifts that keeps on giving, bitterness. It just keeps destroying. And then what it does also, it teaches others how to be critical, fault-finding, unforgiving, evil towards others. Poisoning your own well, parents. You're just spilling a little of your bitterness into the well water, and then every day when you give your kids the glass of water to drink, they're learning, they're growing up, feeding on how to have that same evil, critical, fault-finding, bitter spirit. And it's just way of life. That's just the way we are. That guy said that, I'm never talking to him again. And you don't. And you're justified. You're righteous in your mind. You tell it to the rest of the members of your family, all right, yeah, I did 10 people like that last week. That's the way we are. Don't know why we don't have any friends, but it's our own fault. So we see with David, he chose to trust in the sovereignty of God. Secondly, he chose to forgive Saul and to let it go. He's not holding on to it. When he's thinking of Saul, he's saying he was a pleasant guy, just like his son Jonathan was a pleasant person. Both of them, we had pleasant fellowship. That's what David chose. That was what's in his heart. That's what he remembered. That says time heals all wounds. If you're a forgiving person and you let it go, it's true. But the opposite was bitterness. It grows and grows and grows and grows and gets worse and worse and worse. Until 30 years later, you hate that person more than you did 30 years earlier. It's serious sin, guys. Number 3. He remembered the best things about Saul. He remembered the best things about him. There wasn't a lot to choose from. He's good with a sword. He could run fast. But he did the best to remember what he could. And see, that's, again, a lot of times you think, well, I'll forgive them and I'll just, have all the right thoughts and all the right feelings. No. You've got to command your mind. It says in 2 Corinthians 10, it says, casting down all imaginations, high things, cast them down. And then to command your mind, command your soul, what it's going to think and how it's going to respond. Why are you downcast, O soul? Why are you bitter? Not anymore. Not in this body. These are the kind of attitudes we're going to have. And David's having to, take the bad negative thoughts and he's having to throw them out. Satan's trying to, hey, don't forget, Saul also said this hurtful thing to you when, at Thanksgiving. No, I'm not remembering that. Rebuke that. Rebuke that in the name of Jesus. Get behind me, Satan. I'm not going to remember that. This is what I'm going to remember. And to take and to make those thoughts, to remember those things. And then David also, I think, chose, as he's sitting there at Ziklag, to remember how much God has forgiven him. Here's David in Ziklag. For 16 months, he's backslidden, been an evil man. His town was burnt down. Everything he had was taken away. And what happened? Did God say, yeah, you like living like a crazy man, do you, like, David? Oh, you like going out and killing people, do you? Well, just like you take a dog who pooped on your carpet and you rub his nose in it, that's what I'm doing to you. Smell it. End of story. I'm not talking to you more, David, until you repent, Is that what God had? What did God do to David? Just came and flooded him with mercy and grace. And what did David do to deserve it? Nothing. In the same way, David's there in Ziklag, just soaking up the mercy and the grace of God. And, he went back and he got his family and he came back to Ziklag and he set it around this place that had been burnt down. Why? I think because even though it's a burnt down place, he's sensing God's mercy and grace. He's at the throne of God who dished out mercy and grace. It's not a place that was burnt down where his family was traumatized. For him, it was a place where God had given him much, and he had great revival there. And there David, probably for the first time in 16 months, whips out his guitar and he's writing these songs about, hey guys, everybody get around. Don't let your kids forget this one. Everybody remember this song. It's about Saul and David, and he's singing and worshiping. And so how can I hold, and it's really trying to heal his own soul, his own evil, bitter thoughts towards Saul. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to write this beautiful song about Saul and Jonathan. Here's how I choose to remember them. Here's how I choose everybody to remember them. Hey, Saul, tell us, or hey, David, tell us that time when Saul took the spear and tried to kill you when you were just eating dinner. You know what? Here, I do want to sing a song about Saul. This is what I want you to remember. And there's just those places that we got to stop and remember that we forgave. Why do I say that? Because it's not good enough just to forgive. It's not good enough to just say, I choose not to be bitter. You've got to continue it. Because what happens when you remember things a year later? You can remember it a little clearer sometimes. And you remember it sort of in categories. Yeah, I can remember 3 evil things Saul did again. You know what, though? I forgot about the other 5 others. Oh, let's put that in that category. And man, 3, now I'm, a year later, I'm not just, I can tell you 20 evil things Saul did to me. And 10 of them, I didn't ever really think of them as evil things Saul did towards me, but they were evil. I can't believe he said that. I can't believe he did that. I can't believe that, and he just starts putting, and it grow. And what does David have to do? He needs to remember how much God had forgiven him. How many people did God go out and just burn down their city and kill them, man, woman, and child, steal everything they had just out of greed? And I didn't do it once or twice. I did it over dozens, hundreds different cities. Yeah, Saul did it towards me. I did it towards thousands of people. If I want to point the picture and say, Saul, you're an evil man, blah, 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 God could point the picture at me and say, David, you're an evil man, blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Yeah, you're right. What's Jesus say? To go get the speck out of your brother's eye? How can I do that until I first go and get the log out of my own eye? And then I can go get the speck out of my brother's eye? Remember Luke 18 there where the guy comes to his master and he says, you owe me basically $3 million. And he's like, give me time to pay it off, like he could ever pay it off. And his master says, I forgive you. You owe me nothing. Just go enjoy knowing you've been forgiven. And he walks outside and sees a guy who owes him a couple of bucks. And he says, give me that $2 you owe me. And he's like, just give me some time to pay it back, which is possible. But he starts choking him and he says, no, I'm going to give you another minute, and has him thrown into prison until he pays that money back. And the guy seeing both scenarios go back to the first guy and said, the guy you just forgave $3 million, couldn't you forgive the guy $2? Get that guy back in here. How is it that I could forgive you such great a debt with joy, and you couldn't have mercy to forgive one guy something a fraction of what I forgave you? I want you to take this guy now, turn him over to the torturers, and don't let him stop being tortured until he pays back every penny he owes me. And then Jesus turns, or this is Matthew 18, and Jesus turns to the multitude and says, and so shall my Father do unto every one of you who doesn't forgive his brother from the heart. Wow. The Lord's pretty serious about this stuff, isn't he? David and Ziklag, they're a place where God dumped forgiveness and mercy on him in proportion. Even though Saul for 15 years had been evil to him, still in proportion, David had been forgiven much more by God than he was having to forgive by Saul. And one more thing, the fifth thing here. So the first thing is he chose to the sovereignty of God, to trust in the sovereignty of God. Secondly, he chose to forgive Saul and let it go. Number 3, to remember the best things about Saul. Number 4, to remember how much God had forgiven him and to continue to forgive Saul. And one more thing, the fifth thing, is keep doing it. Because guess what? He's going to meet a whole bunch of more Sauls in his life. One of his Sauls he's going to have in his life is going to be his best friend, Ahithophel. Ahithophel actually had good reason to do what he did, but it was still evil and it was wrong. Another Saul was David's own son. That's a tough one. Some of the Sauls in David's life were righteous in being evil towards him. Some of them, they had no right to be that way. But David was going to see a lot more Sauls in his life. In other words, people that he could have a right to be bitter towards them and it would take him down. And I'm just saying to all of us, guys, Satan is no dummy. He's put landmines all around you through the rest of your life. There are 1,000 landmines, 1,000 different people that you can be bitter towards and be justified in your own mind to be bitter towards them. But it's going to damn you. It's going to poison you. It's going to poison you for other relationships. And so this is an example of something you need to repeat. And then you also got to keep forgiving the people that you've already forgave. You got to keep remembering to let go of the things you let go of a year ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You know, I've seen it where people, let go, quit being bitter towards their dad. And then all of a sudden, 30 years later, it creeps back up. And, let me tell you, my dad, I thought you let that go. I thought you chose to remember only the best things. And here it comes, Satan trying to, some little cyst down in their heart, trying to pop that cyst and get some poison flowing to cause corruption again. You got a purpose in your heart. As we go on into the Kings, it'll say this. And this guy did evil in the sight of the Lord. And his son did evil as he did evil. And his son did evil as his grandpa and his dad did evil. And then you find a guy, he purposed in his heart not to do as his father did. He purposed in his heart to walk righteously before the Lord. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. But it took a deep purpose. Before they ever got to the throne, they purposed in their heart how they were going to walk to do it. Well, finishing up this chapter in verse 6. So Saul and his 3 sons, his armor bearer, and all his men died together in the same day. All these great and mighty, mighty men perished. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and those who were on the other side of the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. The opposite of what God had promised. They would take over the evil men's houses and lands, but not the evil men take over theirs. This is a dark moment. And it happened the next day when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and stripped off his armor and sent word throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim it in the temple of their idols and among the people. They put his armor in the temple of the Asherus, and they fastened his body to the wall of Beth-shan. Beth-shan is another place we go to because at the bottom of the ancient ruins of Beth-shan, which is high up on a hill, is a very clear Roman city. There was an earthquake and everything fell over, and they just sort of put dirt on top of it and built another city. But later, when they excavated it, they were able to find, it's probably in Israel for sure, and maybe for very long throughout the Roman Empire, is a very clear place where they could put back together like a puzzle the ancient site of the Roman city of Beth-shan. But do you have a picture up on top of the hill where the Philistine city was? There it is. See the tail way up there? That is where Saul's body was kept, the Hebrew city taken over by the Philistines. And you can get up there and take some steps. It's quite a difficult walk today. But imagine back then, an ancient city being up there and at the gates where we can find that location today. We'll take you to it, walk you right up to it, where Saul's body was hung there and to be proclaimed throughout the Philistines of their great victory over Israel. And in verse 11, now when the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and traveled all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons and the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. Remember when Nahash, the Amorite, had said to Jabesh-Gilead, all you guys surrender, poke out your eye, and become our slaves, and we'll let you all live? And they said, give us a chance to send word out to see if we have a victor. And it came to Saul. And Saul, the Spirit of God fell upon him. The anger of the Lord came upon him. And he told everybody, you come together, or we kill you. And they all showed up, and they had a great victory. And Jabesh-Gilead now, 20 years later, remembers, hey, when Saul was in the Spirit, when the God's Spirit came upon him, when he was a righteous king and a righteous man, he did an amazing job. And in the Spirit, if you would, God brought about a great victory. And it's right for us now to put our lives on the line to take his body from this place of dishonor. And so they went and they gathered his body at a great cost of the possibility of their own life. As you can see, to get up the top of that hill and get back without being caught would be a very difficult thing. And in verse 13, after they burnt the body, they took their bones and they buried them under the terebinth tree of Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So they gave them a proper burial, sort of just in the woods of Jabesh, a very beautiful place, and then just had 7 days of fasting, of mourning for them. Well, Lord, we thank you for your word tonight, and we rejoice, God, that David, this man after God, your own heart, we begin to see why. And we know that you love mercy. You love commitment. You love when people do the hard thing. Whether it was the beautiful, deep friendship that David had with Jonathan, where we know now that you don't have best friend relationships that are for years or years without going through hard times together, without fighting and wrestling and struggling over the weakness of another that's offended you, or the choices they made that hurt you, or out of great concern that they're doing foolish things that could hurt their marriage or hurt others. And through iron sharpening iron, so we sharpen one another. And blessed are the wounds of a friend. And we see, Lord, that they fought it out and we're the best of friends. And we ask tonight that you would speak into our lives. We know there's a hunger, there's a hurt in all of us that want to be known and for others to know. There's this deep thing in all of us to have best friends and to have that relationship grow over the years. To help especially the young people to awaken to the reality, to find those who seek you out of a pure heart and not let them go. And then we know that one of Satan's main obstacles, he's going to drag many, many to hell with him through bitterness. Justifiable, righteous in our minds, bitterness. But nevertheless, a poison that will cause us not to have your heart of forgiveness and love. We thank you that you forgive us and you then cast our sins into the deepest ocean. You take our sins and scatter them the east to the west to be remembered no more. And we know you can't forget anything. It's a choice you made to choose not to think of us and remember those things, but to remember the best things about us. And we appreciate it. And so with us, Lord, we can take people that have wronged us deeply and choose to remember the right things, the best things about them, not the things that are wrong. Lord, help us tonight. And I know that you wash us in the water of your word, and there's some here tonight that you're washing. The word of the Lord tonight is be willing. You don't have to have the power. You don't have to have the ability. You don't have to have the spirituality. I'd like to. I'm just not that kind of a person. I know that. But God's Spirit lives in you. If you've indeed asked the Lord to come into your life, you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. Just be available. God, I'm available for you to cleanse that bitterness out. I don't have the power. I don't have the vision. I don't have the kindness. I don't have the gentleness. I don't have the love. I've been indoctrinated by my parents to be hateful and critical and mean and holding on to things that have been wrong against me. And that's what they did to everybody and everything, and they're still doing it. And I'm just so programmed that way to unprogram it. How can I? I've been doing that all my life, and I'm 40 years old. How am I going to uncondition myself from that? Just be willing. Just be willing. God will take the rest of it. Just as the Lord has taught us to just say, Lord, your kingdom come, your will be done.